For 22 years, I believed I had a good marriage. I took care of our home, our family, and all the little things that kept our life together. I never suspected an affair. I never imagined my husband was living a double life. To everyone around us, we looked like a happy couple who had built something lasting. Then, on a rainy night, I accidentally overheard a conversation that was never meant for me. Just a few words, a few sentences. But what I heard made me question everything I thought I knew about my life. The hardest part wasn't discovering a secret. It was realizing that deep down, I may have known the truth for years and simply refused to see it. And once that truth was spoken out loud, I found myself facing a choice that would change everything. What happened next forced me to ask a painful question. How long can you keep sacrificing yourself for a life that may never have meant the same thing to the person beside you? I remember because I had just finished folding the last of Arjun's shirts, the blue cotton ones he likes for work, and I could hear the water hitting the tin roof of our neighbor's extension, that familiar sound that fills Missouri every monsoon season. It should have felt peaceful. It usually does. But something about that night felt different in a way I could not explain then and still struggled to put into words now. Arjun was in his office room. That is what we called it, though it was really just the second bedroom that we never used for guests. Over the years, it had slowly filled with his computer setup, a gaming chair his brother gifted him 3 birthdays ago, and a small shelf where he kept some old cricket magazines and a few books he had never read past the first chapter. The door was usually closed when he played. He wore his headphones, and I would hear nothing but the occasional tap of the keyboard. That night, the door was not fully closed. I do not know how it happened. Maybe he forgot. Maybe the latch did not catch. I was not paying attention. I was carrying a small stack of his folded clothes to keep on the shelf near his room, and I heard his voice before I even reached the door. He was laughing. That specific kind of laugh, relaxed, loose, the one that only comes out when a man feels completely comfortable, when he thinks no one important is listening. I almost knocked. I almost called out his name and asked if he wanted some warm milk before bed, the way I sometimes did on rainy nights. But something made me slow down. I do not know what it was. Some quiet instinct. I stood there in the dim hallway, holding his shirts against my chest, and I listened. "Yar, seriously?" he was saying in that casual mix of Hindi and Kannada he used with old friends. Sometimes I think about where I would be right now if I had just stayed single. I heard the other person say something I could not make out clearly. Then Arjun laughed again. "No, I mean it. I am not joking. Think about it. No responsibilities, no compromises, no one asking where you are every 2 hours." My feet stopped moving. I want to be very clear about something. I have never been the kind of wife who called every hour. I have never checked his phone. I have never asked him to give up his friendships, or his evenings, or his hobbies. I gave him his space because I genuinely believed that is what a good marriage looks like. 2 people who trust each other enough not to monitor each other. I stood there and heard him say that. "I would have saved so much more money by now," he continued. "Invested differently. Taken that project in Hyderabad when I had the chance. You remember I told you about that? I said no because of family situation at the time. That was a big mistake, Yar. A really big mistake." I pressed my back against the hallway wall. The shirts in my arms felt very heavy suddenly. I know what some people will say when they hear this. They will say, "He was just venting." Men say these things to their friends sometimes. It does not mean anything. Marriage is hard and everyone complains. I have told myself those same things many times in the months since that night. I have gone over it from every angle. I have tried to be fair to him in my own mind, but I keep coming back to the same thing. Those were not the words of a man having a bad week. That was not frustration after a fight or tiredness after a difficult month at work. There had been no fight between us. That week had been ordinary, even pleasant. We had eaten dinner together every night. On Sunday, we had visited his parents. On Tuesday, I had made his favorite dal, and he had said it was perfect. There was no reason for him to feel that way in that moment, which means it was not a reaction. It was just the truth. And the truth was sitting in that room, behind a door that was not fully closed, speaking freely because he believed I could not hear him. I have been married since I was 24 years old. I was not a young girl with unrealistic ideas about love. I had seen enough of life by then. My parents' long and quiet marriage, my older sister's difficult first years with her husband, the way relationships settle into something more ordinary over time. I knew what I was walking into. I went in with open eyes and a willing heart. For 22 years, I ran our home, not because I was forced to, because I wanted to, because I believed that a home was something you built carefully, the way you tend a garden, slowly, with attention, without expecting anyone to notice every small thing you do. I woke before him every morning. I made sure there was always something warm ready when he came back from work. When his mother was unwell 2 years ago, I was the one who took her to her appointments, sat with her in waiting rooms, managed her medicines. When his younger brother needed help with a loan, I was the one who suggested we give it without expecting it back. When there were festivals, I was the one who remembered every ritual, every relative's preference, every small detail that made those gatherings feel like home. I did not do these things to be praised. I did them because I thought we were building something together. Standing in that hallway, I understood for the first time that I had been building alone. He kept talking. I kept listening. I heard him say that he felt like he had given up too much, that the return on his investment, those were the words he used, return on investment, as if he were talking about a piece of land he had bought, had not been what he expected. I thought about the early years, how hard those first years were, financially, how I had quietly sold the gold bangles my mother gave me at our wedding to help pay for repairs on this house. I never told him. I did not want it to be a debt he carried. I just did it and said nothing and watched him walk around his repaired home feeling proud of what we had built. I thought about the child we lost, in the 7th year of our marriage. How I had gone through that grief mostly by myself, because he did not know how to speak about it, and I did not want to push him into a conversation that made him uncomfortable. How I had folded that pain up very small and placed it somewhere deep inside me and continued cooking his meals and ironing his shirts and asking about his day. I thought about all the times I had stood in front of my mother-in-law and listened to her compare me to his cousin's wife who had a higher-paying job. How I had smiled through it. How Arjun had never once said anything to defend me in those moments. How I had told myself he was just uncomfortable with confrontation and let it go every time. I stood in that hallway and all of it came back to me at once. The shirts in my arms were still warm from the iron. I placed them quietly on the small stool near the door and walked back to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the rain. My hands were completely still in my lap. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I felt a strange, cold clarity, the kind that comes not when you discover something new, but when you finally allow yourself to see something you have been refusing to look at for a very long time. I got up and pulled my old travel bag from under the bed. I did not pack much. A few sets of clothes, my documents, which I had always kept in a small folder in my own corner of the cupboard, my mother's photograph that sits on my side of the dresser, my phone charger, the small amount of money I kept separately in an envelope for emergencies. I have thought about why I did not go in there and confront him, why I did not open that door and stand in front of him and ask him to say those things to my face. I think it is because I already knew what would happen. He would be shocked. He would deny it. He would lower his voice and come close and say I had misunderstood, that I was taking it out of context, that he loved me and I was being irrational. And some part of me, the part that had spent 22 years learning to believe his version of things, might have wavered. I did not trust myself to stay strong in front of him, so I did not give him the chance. I zipped the bag closed. I picked up my phone. I sent one message to my older sister Kavya in Bengaluru. I am coming tonight. Please keep the door open. Then I walked out of my own house into the monsoon rain, and I did not look back. Kavya opened the door before I even knocked. She must have been watching from the window. She does that. Stands near the window when she is worried about someone. I have known this about her since we were children. When our father used to come home late from work, she would stand at the window of our old house in Tumkur and watch the street until she saw his bicycle turning the corner. Old habits stay in the body. She looked at my wet clothes, at the single bag on my shoulder, at my face. She did not ask anything. She just stepped aside and let me in. Her husband, Ramesh, was still awake, sitting in the hall watching some news channel with the volume low. He looked up when I came in, read the situation in 1 second the way decent men do, and quietly got up and went to the bedroom. I have always respected him for things like that, knowing when to disappear. Kavya brought me a towel and a dry set of her clothes without being asked. I changed in the bathroom. I sat down at her kitchen table and she made tea, the strong kind with too much ginger, the way our mother used to make it. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she sat down across from me and said, "Tell me." So I told her. She listened to everything without interrupting. That is another thing I have always loved about my sister. She does not jump in with opinions before you are finished. She waits. She absorbs. When I was done, she sat quietly for a moment, her hands wrapped around her own cup of tea, and then she said something I did not expect. She said, "I am not surprised." I looked at her. "Ananya," she said carefully, "there have been small things, over the years, things I noticed but never said because you seemed happy and I did not want to plant doubts. I asked her what things. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reminded me of something from 8 years ago that I had almost forgotten. We had all gone to a family wedding in Korg, Arjun's side of the family. At one point during the reception, one of his aunts had made a comment about how I had not given the family a child yet. It was said loudly, at the dinner table, in front of at least 12 people. I had felt my face go hot. I had looked at Arjun, waiting for him to say something. He had changed the subject, turned to the person next to him, and started talking about the food. I remembered it now the way you remember something you buried, with a dull ache, like pressing on an old bruise. He never protected you, Kavya said quietly. Not once, in front of his family. I always saw that. I did not argue with her. I could not. That night, I slept in her spare room on a narrow bed with a thin mattress and a ceiling fan that wobbled slightly on the left side. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain continuing outside and thinking about the house I had left, about Arjun, who by now had certainly finished his game, gone to the bedroom, and found it empty. I wondered what he felt in that moment. Panic, probably. Confusion. I wondered if he went through the house calling my name. I felt nothing thinking about it. Not satisfaction, not guilt. Just a flat, empty stillness, like a room after all the furniture has been taken out. He called 41 times before morning. I counted because I watched my phone screen light up again and again in the dark room. I did not answer any of them. At some point, he began sending messages. First, short ones. Where are you? Please call me. I am worried. Then longer ones. Then one that said, I know you heard me. Please let me explain. It was nothing. Please come home. That last message told me everything I needed to know. He was not confused about why I had left. He knew exactly what had happened, which meant he was not going to pretend he had not said those things. He was just going to ask me to forgive them. In the morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Priya Nair, a woman Kavya knew through a friend, someone who handled family cases. I sat in her small office on the 3rd floor of a building near Jayanagar and told her what had happened. She listened carefully, asked a few practical questions about our property and finances, and then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, most women who come to me come after a very visible crisis, an affair, violence, something they can point to and say, there, that is the reason. What you experienced is harder in some ways because there is no visible wound, but invisible wounds are still wounds. I signed the initial paperwork that day. When Arjun found out, his sister called Kavya, asking where I was, and eventually the reason came out. Everything changed very quickly. He arrived at Kavya's building that same evening. He stood outside and called my name. Not my phone, my actual name. Standing on the street below the window like something out of an old film. Kavya's neighbors came to their balconies to see what was happening. I stood back from the window so he could not see me. Kavya went down to speak with him. I watched from above. He looked smaller than I remembered, standing on the wet street in his work clothes, still in the shirt he had worn to office. He was talking with his hands, the way he does when he is upset. At one point, he wiped his eyes. I watched him cry and I felt something I was not prepared for. Not sympathy exactly, more like grief. A deep, aching grief, not for the marriage ending, but for the marriage that I now understood had never fully been what I believed it was. I was not grieving the loss of something real. I was grieving the loss of something I had constructed carefully in my own mind over 22 years, and only now understood was partly a fiction. That is a particular kind of sadness that I do not think has a name. Kavya came back upstairs and told me he was begging to speak to me for 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. She said she would stay in the room if I wanted. She said the choice was entirely mine. I said no, not out of cruelty, not to punish him, but because I knew myself well enough by then to know that 10 minutes would become an hour, and an hour would become a night, and by morning I would be back in a car going home and telling myself that things would be different now. I had seen this happen to other women, women who were stronger than me in many ways. I did not trust the version of myself that existed in a room with Arjun Mehta. So I said no, and I went back to the narrow bed, and I lay there in the dark listening to his car eventually start up and drive away. The next few days were the loneliest of my life, not because I was alone in the physical sense. Kavya was there. Ramesh was kind and quiet and made sure I always had something to eat. Friends called. My younger sister Deepa called from Hyderabad and said she was proud of me, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the question she was not quite asking, which was, "Are you sure about this?" Everyone who loved me was trying to give me support without fully believing I was doing the right thing. I could feel it in the pauses in their sentences, in the way Kavya sometimes started to say something and then stopped. Because from the outside, I understand how this looked. Arjun had not hit me. He had not cheated as far as I knew. He had not left. He had not humiliated me publicly. He had not gambled away our savings or ignored the household or refused to provide. By every visible measure, he was a decent husband. He stayed home in the evenings. He was polite at family gatherings. He had never raised his hand or his voice. What he had done was talk honestly to his friend when he thought no one was listening. And I know how that sounds when I say it out loud. I know there are people who will say, that is not enough reason to leave a 22-year marriage. That every person says things in private they do not mean. That I should have confronted him, spoken to him, given him a chance. But here is what I could not explain to anyone at the time, not even Kavya. It was not just what he said. It was the realization that came with it. Because when I stood in that hallway and heard those words, I did not think, this is out of character. This does not sound like the man I know. I thought, I have always known this. I have just never let myself hear it out loud before. And that recognition, was what I could not come back from. The divorce paperwork takes time. Nobody tells you this when you are in the middle of the worst days of your life, that the legal process moves slowly and requires you to keep showing up, keep signing things, keep sitting in offices and waiting rooms while the rest of your life feels completely suspended. I spent 6 weeks at Kavya's house, 6 weeks of sleeping in that narrow bed, using her bathroom, eating her food, watching her go through her own normal daily routines while mine had completely disappeared. She never made me feel like a burden. Not once. But I felt it anyway. The way you feel things that are true, even when no one says them. I tried to be useful. I cooked when I could. I helped with small things around the house. But there is only so much you can do in someone else's space before you start to feel like a piece of furniture that belongs in a different room. Arjun had stopped coming to the building after that first night. His attempts to reach me had moved through different channels. First, his sister Meena called me. She spoke carefully, in the tone people use when they have been asked to make a call they do not entirely believe in. She said Arjun was devastated, that he was not sleeping, that he had lost weight. She said the whole family was concerned and that she hoped I would reconsider. I listened to everything she said. I thanked her for calling. I told her my decision was made. Then his mother called. That conversation was harder. She is an old woman, nearly 75 now, and her voice has that particular fragility that comes with age, thin at the edges, slightly breathless. When I heard it on the phone, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. Something complicated. She said she did not fully understand what had happened. She said in her time, couples worked through difficulties together. She said leaving was not the answer. She said she had always thought of me as a daughter. I held the phone and listened and thought about all the times I had sat in her kitchen learning her recipes so that Arjun would always have the food he grew up with. I thought about the months after her surgery when I came 3 times a week to help her with her physiotherapy exercises because she trusted me more than the nurse. I thought about how I had held her hand at her husband's funeral and stayed the whole night so she would not be alone. I thought about the dinner table in Korg and her son turning to talk about the food. I said, Amma, I know you care, but this is between me and Arjun, and I need you to respect my decision. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that had gone slightly cold, You are making a mistake you cannot undo. And she hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. What nobody prepares you for, when a long marriage ends, is that you are not just losing one person. You are losing an entire world. A family you spent decades building relationships inside. A set of people who called you by name, who expected you at festivals, who knew your food preferences and your habits and your history. All of that disappears at once, and it disappears in a way that makes you feel like you were the one who chose to burn it down, even though you were not the one who lit the match. Around the 4th week, I started having a recurring thought that frightened me a little. I would wake up at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark and think, what if I am wrong? Not about what I heard. I was not confused about that. His words were clear and I heard them with my own ears and they meant what they meant, but about what they meant for everything else. 22 years is not a small thing to walk away from. There were real moments inside that marriage. Trips we took together, meals that were genuinely warm, evenings where we sat on the balcony and talked until late, and it felt like friendship. I could not look back at all of it and call it false. Some of it had been real. Some of it had been good. Was one overheard conversation enough to erase all of that? I lay awake and turned this question over and over until it lost its shape entirely. Then one morning I was sitting at Kavya's kitchen table, drinking tea and looking at nothing in particular, and Kavya sat down across from me with her own cup and said, Can I tell you something honestly? I said yes. She said, I think what is making this hardest for you is not the doubt. I think you are completely sure. I think what is making it hard is that you are waiting for someone to tell you that you are allowed to be sure. I looked at her. You have spent so long making sure everyone around you is comfortable with your choices, she said. His family, his mother, even me. You are waiting for all of us to nod and say yes, you are right, this is okay. And we are not going to, Ananya. Not all of us. Some of them will never agree, and you are going to have to decide if you can live with that. I did not say anything for a long time. Then I said, I gave that man the best years of my life. I know, she said. Not because he asked me to, because I wanted to, because I thought we were in it together. I know, she said again, and he sat in that room and told his friend it was a mistake. Kavya put her hand over mine on the table. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Something settled in me that morning. Not happiness. I want to be honest about that. It was not relief or lightness or any of the things people sometimes describe when they talk about making a difficult decision. It was something quieter, more like the feeling of finally setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying for so long, you forgot it was not supposed to be yours. I called Priya Nair that afternoon and told her to move forward with everything. The legal process has its own rhythm, and once you commit to it fully, you are swept along whether you feel ready or not. There were documents about the house. We had bought it jointly, and there were details to work out that required both of us to be present at the same time in the same room, which happened twice during this period. Those 2 meetings were the only times I saw Arjun face to face after that monsoon night. The first time, he looked like he had not slept properly in weeks. He had lost weight, as Meena had said. He was wearing a formal shirt that seemed slightly too large for him now, and his eyes, when they met mine across the table in the lawyer's office, had a look in them that I had never seen before on his face. Not anger, not the wounded dignity that men sometimes put on when they feel their pride has been damaged. Just a kind of raw, open sadness that surprised me. He did not try to speak to me privately. He sat on his side of the table and I sat on mine, and our lawyers spoke to each other, and we signed what needed to be signed, and then we both left through the same door at different times. In the car on the way back to Kavya's house, I cried for the first time since that night, properly, deeply, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere below words. Kavya drove and said nothing and let me finish. When I was done, she handed me a packet of tissues from her bag, the kind she always carries, and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. The second meeting was shorter and more businesslike. By then, both of us had retreated fully into the practical. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided. There were a few shared accounts to close. The small things, the accumulated objects of 22 years, had been divided quietly through messages passed between the lawyers, most of which I did not care about. I asked for my mother's photograph, which was still on the dresser where I had left it. I asked for the small bronze Ganesha that had been a wedding gift from my own family. I asked for the sewing machine that had been mine before the marriage. He gave me all of it without any discussion. The night after the second meeting, I sat in Kavya's spare room and looked around at the narrow space. The thin mattress, the wobbling fan, the small window that looked out at the side wall of the next building, and I understood that I could not stay here much longer. Not because Kavya wanted me to leave. She had made it very clear that I was welcome for as long as I needed, but because I had spent my entire adult life living inside someone else's story. First my parents' house, then Arjun's house, now my sister's house. I was 46 years old, and I had never lived anywhere that was fully mine. That thought sat with me all night. Not with fear, exactly. With something I did not quite recognize at first, because I had not felt it in a very long time. Something that felt, very quietly and very carefully, like the beginning of wanting something for myself. I found the apartment on a Thursday morning. It was not much. A small 2-room flat on the second floor of an older building in Vijayanagar, a neighborhood I had always liked without ever having a particular reason to. The building had a narrow staircase and a landlord who was a quiet retired school teacher named Mr. Srinivas, who asked me 3 questions when we met: whether I worked, whether I had references, and whether I was comfortable with the fact that the water sometimes ran slow in the mornings. I said yes to all 3. The flat had one window in the main room that looked out at a small gulmohar tree in the street below. The tree was not flowering yet, but you could see the buds forming on the branches. The walls were painted a pale yellow that had faded to something closer to cream. The kitchen was small but had good light. I stood in the empty main room for a few minutes after Mr. Srinivas showed me around. He waited by the door, giving me space, The way people do when they understand that a decision is being made that is about more than just rent and square footage. I said I would take it. Moving in took less than a day. I did not have much. The things I had brought from the marriage fit into 2 bags and 1 cardboard box. My sister and her husband helped me carry everything up the narrow staircase. Ramesh assembled a small iron cot that Kavya had bought for me as a housewarming gift. Kavya wiped down the kitchen shelves with a wet cloth before putting anything on them, the way our mother always used to do in a new space. When they left that evening, I closed the door behind them and stood in the silence of my own flat for the first time. I want to describe this moment honestly, without making it into something it was not. It was not triumphant. There was no rush of freedom or joy. The flat was empty and slightly echoing and smelled of old paint, and I was 46 years old and alone in a way I had not been since before I could clearly remember. I sat down on the edge of the cot and looked at the pale yellow walls and the cardboard box in the corner, and the single bag I had not yet unpacked, and I felt the full weight of everything that had brought me here. I thought about the house in Masuru, the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, the balcony where we used to sit in the evenings, the bedroom with the window that faced the garden. I had loved that house. It had been mine in the only way I understood at the time, through the care I put into it, through the life I built inside it. And now, it was being sold to strangers who would repaint the walls and change the curtains and have no idea what had happened in its hallways. I sat on the cot for a long time. Outside, the street sounds drifted up through the window. An auto rickshaw, someone calling to a neighbor, the distant sound of a temple bell at the end of the evening prayers. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a city continuing its life without any awareness of mine. Eventually, I got up and unpacked the cardboard box. My mother's photograph went on the small shelf near the window. The bronze Ganesha went beside it. I put my few books in a row against the wall. I found a steel glass in one of the bags and went to the kitchen and ran the tap. The water did run slow, just as Mr. Srinivas had warned, and drank a full glass of water standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the back wall of the next building. Then I made tea. The first thing I cooked in my own kitchen. I did not have proper tea leaves yet, only a few bags I had brought from Kavya's house. I made it weak and slightly wrong and drank it standing up because I did not have a chair yet. It tasted like the beginning of something I could not name. The months that followed were not easy. I will not pretend otherwise. I found work. I had always had some skill in tailoring and alterations, something I had done casually for neighbors and friends over the years, and I began to formalize it. A small notice in the local Facebook group for the neighborhood. A few referrals. It was not much money at first, but it was mine in a way that nothing had been mine in a very long time. Money I had made with my own hands, that went into an account with only my name on it. There were hard days. Days when I woke up at 4 a.m. with that particular loneliness that is different from sadness. A physical feeling, like cold air on exposed skin. Days when I walked to the market and saw couples together and felt something hollow open up inside my chest. Not because I wanted to be back in my marriage, but because I missed the idea of not being alone. The idea that someone was expecting me home. There were days when I questioned myself again, when I picked up my phone and stared at Arjun's number for long minutes without calling. I never called. Not because I hated him. I want to be honest about this. The anger, when it came, never stayed long. What replaced it was something more complicated, a kind of tired clarity. I did not hate Arjun Mehta. I think he is a man who was never fully honest with himself about what he wanted, and so he could never be fully honest with me. I think he cared about me in the way that he was capable of caring. I think his version of our marriage was probably real to him, even as it was built on a foundation that I had been maintaining entirely alone. I think he genuinely did not see what I did. Not because he was cruel, but because I had been so careful, for so long, never to show him the weight I was carrying. That is not his fault entirely. That is something I have had to sit with about myself. I had made myself invisible inside my own marriage. I had smoothed every edge, absorbed every difficulty, presented him with a life that ran without friction, and then been hurt that he did not see the effort. You cannot make yourself invisible and then grieve that you are not seen. I understand that now. It does not change what I heard. It does not make those words smaller, but it has helped me stop carrying them as pure wound and start carrying them as information. Information about him, yes, but also about me. The gulmohar tree outside my window flowered in April. I noticed it one morning when I was sitting at the window with my tea, a proper cup now, in a proper chair I had bought secondhand from a woman 2 streets away. The flowers were orange-red, the color that seems almost too vivid to be real, and there were dozens of them suddenly where there had only been buds before. The street below was scattered with the ones that had fallen overnight. I sat there for a long time looking at it. I am not going to say it felt like a sign or a symbol. I have never been the kind of person who believes life arranges itself into neat meanings. But I will say that something about that morning felt different from the months before. Quieter. Like a particular kind of noise had finally stopped. I thought about the woman I had been on that monsoon night, standing in the hallway with a stack of folded shirts, hearing her life described as a mistake by the man she had built it for. I thought about what she did next. How she did not scream or collapse or wait for someone to tell her what to feel. How she just quietly packed a bag and walked out into the rain and kept moving. I have not always been kind to that woman in my memory. I have questioned her. I have wondered if she overreacted, if she was too hasty, if she threw away something that could have been repaired. I have heard other people wonder the same things, sometimes aloud. But sitting at that window looking at the gulmohar tree, I felt something shift in how I thought about her. She had spent 22 years making sure everyone around her was comfortable, making sure the house was warm and the meals were ready and the relationships were maintained and the pain was hidden. She had done all of this so quietly and so completely that even the person she did it for had no idea it was happening. And when she finally heard the truth, not spoken to her face, not as an accusation, but just the honest private truth of how her life was seen, she did not fall apart. She packed a bag. She called her sister. She found a lawyer. She found an apartment. She planted herself, slowly and imperfectly, in her own life. I think she deserves more credit than I have given her. I am writing this almost 2 years after that night. The divorce was finalized 14 months ago. The house in Mysuru was sold. I do not know who lives there now. I hope they are happy in it. I hope someone sits on that balcony in the evenings. I live in my small flat in Vijayanagar, with my mother's photograph and my bronze Ganesha and a sewing machine that hums in the afternoons while the street sounds drift up through the window. I have a few regular clients now and enough work to be stable. I have learned to cook for one, which sounds simple and is not. I have learned to sit in silence without needing to fill it. My sister calls every few days. My younger sister Deepa visited last month, and we walked around the neighborhood together, and she held my hand at one point without saying anything, and I understood that she was finally saying she understood. Arjun remarried last year. His sister told Kavya, who told me gently, as if delivering news that might break something. It did not break anything. I sat with it for a day and felt the complicated mixture of feelings you would expect. A trace of something that was not quite sadness, and beneath it a kind of stillness that I recognized as peace. I hope he is honest with her in ways he was not able to be honest with me. I hope he has learned something. I genuinely hope this, without bitterness, in the way you hope good things for someone you have stopped being responsible for. I am 48 years old now, and I live alone, and I am, on most days, okay. Not happy in the way that word gets used carelessly, not healed in the way that suggests the wound is gone, but present, awake, in possession of my own life in a way I was not for a very long time. If you are reading this and you recognize something in it, that particular feeling of pouring yourself into a life and slowly realizing the container has a crack, I want you to know that I am not telling you what to do. Every situation is different. Every marriage is its own private world with its own rules and histories that nobody outside can fully see. But I want you to know this one thing. The moment I finally heard the truth was not the worst moment of my life. It was the moment I stopped being the only one in the room who did not know it. And however much that hurt, and it hurt more than I have words for, there was also something in it that felt, underneath all the pain, like the first honest breath I had taken in years.